All right, here's a video on photosynthesis and respiration, how plants get fuel. And it's important to know that plants do go through respiration like other animals will go through, like we will go through. We'll go through cellular respiration. Plants will go through both. So we'll talk about that. And in photosynthesis, we know that green plants, like you're seeing in the background there, algae, and some bacteria, they'll convert photons, these little quantum of energy, which is light energy, that can convert the light energy into chemical energy. So basically, on the electromagnetic spectrum, we have radio waves and gamma rays and so forth, but we just want visible light for the plants, right? The plants just want visible light, specifically the red and blue wavelengths. So the plants will make ATP and eventually they'll make glucose. So in cellular respiration, we use our food and we break down the food to get the glucose out. And with the glucose, once we have glucose, we can make ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The plants will also do that, but they're going to make ATP first. So just like us, we need energy to make energy. And so they'll with the light energy, with those photons, they'll make ATP. And then with that ATP, they can make glucose, and with the glucose they can make more ATP. So we'll talk about that. And here's the electromagnetic spectrum I talked about. Gamma ray being the shortest wavelengths and the most dangerous wavelengths, have the highest energy. And as you can see, as you go to the right, all the way down to visible light after ultraviolet, that's the only light we see. Birds can see ultraviolet, by the way, and snakes, mosquitoes can see in infrared. So, so in that, let's get our pen going over here. In this range, and what should we use? We'll use black. So in the range of visible light, now just visible light, right over here, red has the longest wavelength, and violet has the shortest wavelength. But plants prefer red and blue. They prefer red and blue. And blue is the best, but combined, they really help the plant. So blue light is highly absorbed by chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B, and red light itself is good for germination on the young plant. And there's another word we'll talk about, phototropism. Let me write that down. Let's write it over here. Phototropism. Fancy word, right? All it means is plants move toward light, and that's logical, right? They want to optimize photosynthesis, so they'll move toward light. And plants move toward blue light best. So plants move to blue. They play the blues. Playing with Joe Bonamassa. Little blues reference there. So let's we're going to talk about photosynthesis first. So let's look at the formula for photosynthesis. Right over here, we'll put photosynthesis formula, chemical formula. It's good to know how to read chemical formulas. So on one side of the formula, we have 6 CO2 plus 6 water molecules. It's important to know how much we have here so far. So we have 6 carbon. The C is carbon. But we have 12 oxygen just from here, right? You see that little subscript over there? It's a 2. 6 times 2 is 12. There's 6 O2 molecules, and we breathe in O2. So that's 12 oxygen. And over here we have, what do you think we have for hydrogen? Well, we have 12 hydrogen. Do you know how we got it? Well, there's a little subscript there. So that's an H2 molecule, and we have 6 of them, so that's 12 hydrogen. And then we'll have 6 oxygen. So if we look at the totals that we have on this side, the left side, which are the reactants, right? The reactants are on one side, and they'll make the products. So we have 6 carbon, but we have 12 hydrogen, and we have 18 oxygen. And this will yield, there's the yield sign, it'll yield a product. It's going to yield glucose. And this is the glucose formula. We have C6H12O6, right? Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That makes glucose. That's the sugar. Plus, it'll make the oxygen that's being released as waste. By the way, we forgot over here, we also need light energy. Light energy. Maybe we'll make it yellow over there. We need those photons, light energy. And this is what it will yield. But it has to balance. So does it balance? Well, we had 6 carbon, and over here we have 6 carbon, so that's right. We had 12 hydrogen as the reactant, and here's 12 hydrogen. But it says we have 18 oxygen. We need to have 18 oxygen on this side. Well, we have 6 over here, and 6 times 2 is 12 over here. That's 18, so it's balanced. That's how we read a chemical equation. All right, and here's a famous, well, not a famous picture, but I'm sure most of you have seen this picture. Even in going back all the way to middle school, probably you've seen that in high school. So we have carbon dioxide, CO2 coming into the plant. They're going into the green leaves. And in these green leaves, there's these microscopic openings. Make sure we have our pen working here, called stomata. And the stomata are these holes that will let CO2 in, and they'll let O2 out. Oxygen is a waste product, but plants also need oxygen, by the way. At nighttime, plants will take in oxygen through the stomata. So even though they're releasing oxygen now, they'll take it back in. And they also need to bring in some water, delicious dihydrogen monoxide, H2O. And they'll bring that in and they'll split the water so the oxygen will be released as a waste, and they'll have that H2 because they need that hydrogen to help in photosynthesis. Now, the glucose is not being released, it's not falling. This is a sugar, by the way. It's the preferred sugar in the body. It's the preferred sugar in plants, but they also will make fructose. So the glucose is, according to this picture, it's falling out of the plant. But no, it's going to be used in the plant, and they will store it in the plant. So basically, what photosynthesis is, the photons, these quantums of light, they'll enter the chloroplast, and I'll show a picture of that. It's an organelle within the plant. It's going to be absorbed by the chlorophyll pigments. And then you're going to have these series of reactions, because once the photon hits inside the chloroplast, it's going to excite electrons. And these electrons are going to basically steal the energy that the photons had. And they'll use these reactions, they'll use this energy to eventually make ATP. And then eventually they'll make glucose. They'll make their own food. So here's a cut up of the chloroplast. And so inside the chloroplast, you see these disc-like shapes, right? These little discs, they are the thylakoids. And the photons, not protons, the photons, coming from the sun, obviously, are yellow dwarf G-type star. Those photons, and there's about a quadrillion amount of photons coming in every second. There's a lot of photons hitting this plant, and they'll hit the thylakoids. Water will split, and the photons will excite electrons. Very important to know that the photons will excite electrons, and that's the energy that the electrons will use to eventually make ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So as you see here in this picture, right, the sun, the photons, we're going to be entering the first stage, is the light-dependent reaction stage, where the electrons are excited, and you can see, as in the circle, adenosine triphosphate is made, and we'll get our pen, and we'll circle another one over here. I'll use purple one. NADPH is also formed, and that has a very fancy word, nicotinamide adenosine dinucleotide phosphate, right? So we just say NADPH, right? Why bother with that? And then inside, so ATP and this energy is formed, and in the Calvin cycle is when glucose will be formed. Glucose will be formed in the Calvin cycle. And again, another picture as water enters, right? It's split. Oxygen is released as a waste. Photons coming in the light reaction. And this is the first part of photosynthesis, where we see ATP being made and NADPH going inside the Calvin cycle, and in the Calvin cycles, we finally need CO2. So carbon dioxide finally enters in the Calvin cycle. We needed it in the beginning. You saw carbon dioxide coming in. And in the Calvin cycle, again, we'll have a new molecule over here. And make sure my pen's working. Keep that right here. And now this is what is happening is the photons, when they were going through the electron transport chain, they were bringing hydrogen ions with them. Because remember, the oxygen was split. And so these hydrogen ions with the electrons will now reduce the NADPH to NAPD plus. So it has a positive charge to it. And that could be a lot to go over, but again, here's another picture to make it a little more simplified. So basically, a photon enters the chloroplasts and the thylakoids, and inside that, the chlorophyll is absorbing them, and these electrons now are excited, and they're going to get to the electron acceptor, and the electron acceptor is this NADPH, and eventually now we'll have energy formed. Energy is made in this stage. And then in the Calvin cycle, they're going to take that energy to make glucose. And that glucose is going to be stored. And the plants will store glucose because they're going to need energy, especially at night. Or they're going to need energy uh, in when times of low sunlight. So again, plants are smart. They'll store energy and they'll store the glucose so they can make ATP later. And so when they're using glucose later, that's when cellular respiration takes over. So let's go back. So this again was just a little basic on photosynthesis and respiration. Remember, plants go through both and they need respiration, cellular respiration, especially because they store glucose and they're going to store it because they're going to need fuel later. Especially at night when they're taking oxygen instead of carbon dioxide. So when times of low light or extreme times, so where there's low light or they're not getting enough energy, from the photons, they'll take their glucose that they stored and make ATP just like we do. And when you're taking glucose to make adenosine triphosphate, ATP, well, then you're using respiration. All right, so that's our little video today.